Well, has there been a more tumultuous time in the state's legal history? This week has seen a High Court challenge to the Newman government's signature anti-bikie laws, an appeal of the Cowan sentence, the overhaul of the Crime and Misconduct Commission, and the resignation of the government's top legal advisor. To discuss those issues and more, I was joined earlier by one of the state's most high-profile lawyers, Bill Potts. Bill Potts, the Cowan sentence is being appealed. What chance do you think the Attorney-General has of getting a tougher sentence?
Well, the reality is that the Attorney-General is trying to argue before the Court of Appeal that a sentence of life imprisonment is somehow manifestly inadequate. The judge, as far as I can see, took into account everything that she could and imposed the only sentence that was available, life imprisonment. But she then had to make a recommendation that essentially was that he should not be considered for parole until at least 20 years have passed.
So, for instance, Max Sica got 35 or more years for the triple murder. Couldn't she have said, I sentence you to 40 years in prison?
No, because in Queensland, if you are convicted of more than 2 murders, then they can effectively up the non-parole period. But of course, at the end of the day, the Court of Appeal will have to have regard to other sentences, and in this particular case, my view is that, in essence, that it's going to be a hard ask for the Attorney-General to get up on.
Now, another legal actions from one of your fellow Gold Coast lawyers, Chris Hannay. He's suing the Premier for defamation for some comments the Premier made with respect to calling lawyers who act for bikies hired guns and part of the criminal machine. Do you think that's going to be a successful case?
Again, it's hard to know. Defamation is a rich man's sport, and of course, in this type of things, if you're going to play first grade, you've got to expect to take a few knocks. But I really wonder about the rhetoric of these things. I have myself been called a hired gun, or maybe I'm a water pistol, I don't know. But the reality is that I have acted for politicians. It doesn't make me into a politician lawyer. I've acted for murderers. It doesn't mean I approve of murder or that I'm a murderer myself. I've acted for, God forbid, journalists, and I'll never be a journalist. But at the end of the day, we mustn't, and this is where I think the Premier is perhaps getting it wrong, we mustn't confuse the fact that good, independent lawyers acting on behalf of somebody whom perhaps are despised in society, I don't know, but we shouldn't confuse the lawyer for the actual person they're representing.
Now, you represent the Finks, the Mongols, but there is another case the Hells Angels are bringing to challenge the anti-bikie laws in the High Court. Have you had a look at that case?
I've looked at some of the arguments that surround it, and it's quite clear that what they're trying to do is to challenge the constitutional validity of the legislation.
And this is because freedom of association, but that's not enshrined in our Constitution.
It is not, and that's the thing. We don't have, as they have in America.
So they'd have to be quite activist to knock out these laws.
They would on that particular argument. We don't have a Bill of Rights, as they do in America. But what we do have are principles of law which have been enforced. We have international treaties which we are signatories to, and we have a High Court that is prepared to effectively overturn laws which offend against some of those very important principles. One of the most important principles that is being looked at, I suspect, by the High Court in this case, is whether, without a trial, without evidence, and without
evidence that can be tested.
Well, without evidence at all.
Because the police can submit that you are, based on intelligence, a member of a bikie gang.
They used to do that under the old legislation. This new legislation, the Criminal Law Amendment Act, effectively allows the government, by regulation, to declare groups to be criminals. Now, under the 2010 Act, you had to go to a court and produce evidence.
You still have to prove that they're members of bikie gangs.
That's true, but the assertion under the Act is essentially that any person who is a member of these groups is a member of a criminal group.
And thus the freedom of association argument.
And for the first time, what we're seeing is that parts of our society are able to be declared to be criminal, and criminal in nature, simply by way of a signature or a dash on a piece of paper by the Attorney-General. And for some, I suspect that that's a step too far. Now,
the same day that the High Court challenge was lodged by the Hells Angels and their lawyers, the supposed part architect of these laws, Walter Sofronoff, the Solicitor General, their top legal advisor in the state, he's resigned. Now, that brings a long list of senior figures who are now out of the frame and new people are in there, isn't it?
It does. Within a very short period of time, the Attorney-General, effectively the government, is going to have to appoint a new Chief Justice. Later this year, when Her Honour Judge Wolf retires, a new Chief Judge, and now obviously a Solicitor General. In the last 12 months we've also had a new Chief Magistrate, and what that shows is that the government has really, I suppose, a chance to shape the way in which the courts operate. They floated recently the idea of a dedicated Court of Appeal, and no doubt new dedicated judges for that. So I am concerned, I suppose, in these types of matters that there's a certain lack of transparency in the way in which judicial figures are appointed in this state.
What, you're saying that they should be taken out of the hands of politicians?
A different system, as far as I can see, could include a judicial commission that would have the opportunity to interview people, to make sure that they're appointed on the grounds of transparent merit, and that they can then make recommendations to the government. I'm arguing for a system which I think is more transparent, and of course it will never get in because politicians are always loath to give up power.
Also not surprising that a solicitor would want to argue about something. Phil Potts, I'm out of time. Thanks very much for coming in, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Thank you for having me.